Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Senator Tom Cotton represents the state of Arkansas in the United States Senate. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's also chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. Senator, welcome. The big story this afternoon is a story out of Jerusalem that the Netanyahu government is approving the full occupation of Gaza, and that means going into every part of Gaza, including where the hostages are held. Dr. Michael Oren told me that operation took 1 day in 1956, a day and a half in 1967. How long do you expect this to take, and how ferocious of the fighting do you expect it to be?
Well, Hugh, Michael Oren is certainly more of an expert on Israel's military history and capabilities than am I. But given the prowess and skill and courage they've displayed over now nearly 2 years of war, not just against Hamas, but Hezbollah and Iran and other Iranian terrorist proxies, I think they will be successful, having made this resolution. And I think the events of the last week probably galvanized the prime minister and his cabinet. You had the lies spread by Hamas and its willing dupes and apologists and sympathizers in Europe and the United States that Israel was guilty for starving poor children in Gaza, when in reality it's Hamas. It's always used food as a weapon. And then emboldened, of course, by Western liberals buying that hook, line, and sinker, and even promising a terror statelet for Hamas. Hamas put out video over the weekend of one of the remaining hostages in an actual example of deliberate starvation. And I would imagine, again, that sequence of events has galvanized not just the government in Israel, but the people of Israel, that they have to deal the final blow to Hamas if there's any hope of rescuing any of those hostages before they all perish.
Before you were a congressman and before you were a senator, you were a soldier. And one of the things Dr. Oren said I'd like you to speak to is that soldiers' capability in war declines dramatically after 40 days of combat. Now, Israel does rotate its soldiers from and its reservists from high-intensity campaigns to low-intensity campaigns. Nevertheless, it's 2 straight years of war. What do you think about that 40-day number, and whether or not is the IDF going to be able to pull this off because they're exhausted?
Well, without specifying a single number, Hugh, I think it's common sense that anyone has from their own experiences that when you're engaged in arduous physical labor for an extended period, of course, your strength, your endurance, your stamina, and ultimately your performance declines over time, whether that's training or fighting for a war or playing a Major League Baseball season or an NFL football season or running or swimming at a track or swim meet. Obviously, as you said, Israel does its best to rotate its soldiers, many of whom are reservists and are working on reserve duty, and that puts a strain on Israeli society. But I do think that's probably another consideration for the government and the people of Israel, not only the wear and tear on their soldiers, but also what it means for their society and their economy as well, to have such a large part of their fighting age men and women mobilized fighting this war, as opposed to at their jobs, as they would have been if it hadn't been for the terrible October 7th atrocities.
Now, Senator, today Donald Trump on the tarmac rejected completely a reporter's question about whether or not what was happening in Gaza was a genocide. And he said no, and he reminded people of the 10/7 massacre. What else can America do in the information war when you've got Macron and Starmer and Carney and every other of our, quote, allies blaming Israel for being attacked on 10/7 in essence?
Well, I commend President Trump for once again displaying the moral clarity that is so often lacking from our allies in Europe or from the Democratic Party here in America, that the only attempted genocide is against the people of Israel by Hamas on October 7th, the threatened genocide or attempted genocide by Iran 3 times in the last year and a half, shooting missiles into heavily populated civilian areas. That's the only threat of genocide in the Middle East. So I commend the president, who has the very best megaphone for combating those specious claims. You know, others of us, like you, like me, like our friends Mark Levin, like other senators, like Ted Cruz, do it as well. But obviously the president has the biggest megaphone, and he's to be commended.
Is there anything that the Congress can do to further back Israel? I know we do a lot of military aid. I think we should do more. I don't think we can do it until the fall. But is there anything else the Congress, the legislative branch, can do to support our ally?
Well, thank goodness Congress is in the hands of Republicans and that Donald Trump is back in the White House, because last week Bernie Sanders and other anti-Zionist Democrats voted, I think it may be a majority of them, of the Democratic senators, voted to cut off military aid to Israel in the middle of a shooting war. It's not as if peace and prosperity has broken out. They're still in the middle of a shooting war, as we just discussed. They have a high proportion of their reservists mobilized, yet Democratic senators last week voted to cut off aid. Fortunately, every Republican, or almost every Republican, voted to preserve that aid. Polling has shown that 9 out of 10 of President Trump's supporters and self-identified MAGA voters support aid to Israel. So no matter what you hear from our Democratic colleagues like Elizabeth Warren or Zoran Mamdani, support for Israel, both among Republicans in the Congress, but also among the American people, is very high. And I think we should find every opportunity to express that support.
Last question, Senator. One of the things Dr. Oren mentioned is that Israel is losing support among Republicans, especially among young MAGA-identifying Republicans. I don't believe that. I just don't believe it. Do you believe it?
No, Hugh, I don't think so, but I do think it's incumbent upon all of us who care about the U.S.-Israel relationship and who recognize that Israel is a model ally that has never asked the United States to fight its wars for them, that has only asked for the tools to defend themselves and protect our common interests. We have to teach every new generation why it's such an important relationship, why it matters so much, why we have consistently supported Israel since we were the very first nation to recognize the modern state of Israel in 1948. So we can't take that support for granted, but I don't think that support is at grave risk. There may be some people with outsized megaphones who flirt with anti-Zionist and even nearly anti-Semitic rhetoric on podcasts and so-called influencers on social media. But if you look at the president's actions and his words and you look at public polling, it would seem that those so-called influencers don't have all that much influence.
I agree with that. Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to talking to you again next week.